Hi, my name is Ganesh, and today I'll be presenting a paper from EMNLP 2023 called Appraising the Potential Uses and Harms of Large Language Models for Medical Systematic Reviews. So I'll begin with an introduction to the work. So just for some reference, there was a prior work sort of in a similar space back in 2022 by researchers at Meta called Galactica. So Galactica was a large language model that was supposed to be able to store, combine, and reason about scientific knowledge. Now, Galactica seemed to be like a success, and it was certainly a step in the right direction. But shortly after its release in 2022, it was taken down from public use because users found that it was prone to factual inaccuracies and could also be easily provoked to generate harmful text. As an example of this, there were many stories of Galactica being prompted to generate an article that explains the benefits of eating glass. And it would do so citing, basically fake evidence. And so this is bad because it, first of all, leads directly to harmful actions by humans, and it also is contradictory with scientific ground truth. Now, the authors of this paper explore large language models in the context of medicine, and particularly they ask the question, can large language models produce literature reviews for medicine? So these reviews are called medical systematic reviews, and they're a very important part of modern practices. So medical systematic reviews consist of essentially summaries of many pieces of literature on a particular topic, and they also propose suggestions for clinical practice. Now, producing high quality reviews is a very difficult task for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a highly sensitive topic, so being precise and scientifically accurate is incredibly important. And also, there's just so much literature to parse through in order to produce a truly representative review. So the authors explore the viability of automating this task using large language models. Now I'll go over sort of the formal research questions that the authors propose in the paper. The first relates to just the general perspectives of domain experts on the viability of LLMs. So what they think about, maybe they've used LLMs in the past and how they have already incorporated LLMs in their work. The second question deals with the concerns that these domain experts might have with the deployment of LLMs for real-world use. And the third and final question relates to using the suggestions and criteria that domain experts use to evaluate something like this to actually, formally produce some kind of evaluation metric for LLMs in the biomedical space. Now I'll go over some related work in the field. The authors say that most prior work has focused on not direct summary generation, but rather on either knowledge retrieval, like identifying relevant studies, or single document summaries. So given a piece of text, generating a summary for kind of a quick digestion by a human. Now, the task that the authors aim to sort of explore is generating these summaries directly without the use of external references. So they expect the large language models to sort of ingest all the relevant studies that they might need during the pre-training process so that during inference, they can just refer to that without any additional material. The authors rely on some previous work as the LLMs that they use in order to test. So specifically, they use three LLMs: Galactica, as previously mentioned, Biomed LM, which is a language model that's trained on a corpus of biomedical text, specifically, and finally ChatGPT as a reference as well. The authors identify several risks of generative models. As previously mentioned, medicine is one of the most sensitive fields in terms of having very precise and accurate information. First of all, having false medical information being spewed from a large language model can cause serious harm, especially when deployed at a large scale. They argue that most prior works have been more like general language models that have been tested on medical data, or medical text, but they aim to contextualize the benefits and harms of an LLM that's designed for a specific healthcare application. So this is going to be a more specific use case of a language model. I'll go over the methods that the authors use in the paper to answer their research questions. They begin by just generating titles of recent reviews from a journal named Cochrane. Now they use these titles as prompts for the three language models previously discussed in order to generate these synthetic reviews. They sample the outputs that are generated by these language models in step 3, and then in step 4 they show these outputs to domain experts and basically get their feedback about both the specific pieces of text that they see and also the general viability of using language models in the space. And finally, in step 5, they conduct a qualitative analysis on the interviews in order to propose a few suggestions that we'll discuss at the end. So we'll sort of dive into each of these steps so we can get an idea of how the authors answer their questions. First of all, with steps 1 and 2, these are focused on just generating the summaries that are then shown to domain experts. So as I mentioned before, they use the Cochrane library of systematic reviews in order to get their prompts. Specifically, they take prompts from all 37 of the medical topics included in that library, and they use these titles as part of very simple prompts to generate 128 evidence summaries. One thing to note here is that they don't do extensive prompt engineering, so they keep it to a very simple prompting setup. This is, they say, to emulate the kind of prompting that an actual medical professional would do. Probably not super extensive prompt engineering, probably something very simple. Now, from these 128 outputs, they select a sample of the summaries, and they select samples that have like certain categories of errors. Specifically, they identify these 11 categories. A couple of them are listed above: incomplete output, contradictory statements, even things like missing citations and references are included. So now that they have identified a sample of the summaries, they move on to step 4, which is the interview process with domain experts. So they selected 16 domain experts from five countries, and they interviewed them remotely over Zoom. They presented each reviewer with 2 LLM outputs that are randomly sampled from the bag that they had before. So they asked for feedback on the outputs themselves, and also for their overall opinions on how LLMs might be used in the medical context. The final step, step 5, is a qualitative analysis of the interviews. So they transcribe the interviews and perform thematic analysis to identify sort of shared concerns or shared benefits that were proposed by the domain experts. And they tried to sort of categorize each of these as either instances of usefulness or instances of harmfulness. So now I'll go over the results that are shown in the paper. So first of all, the potential uses. So these are cases where domain experts felt like large language models could certainly be of use. So many of these are summarization related tasks, as mentioned before. So taking in a specific piece of text and generating a shorter summary of it, distilling the information, and even cross-checking across documents. And one thing to note here is many of the domain experts thought that the LLM showed great promise in being a first draft on these reviews. So the reason they're only a first draft is because many of them still believe that there should be a human in the loop. And on that note, we'll move on to the concerns that were outlined by the domain experts. The LLMs failed on several fronts, as is to be expected at this stage. The domain experts complained that LLMs were often not comprehensive or not clear and specific. Also, in certain instances, they straight up fabricated references and statistics, which is obviously extremely harmful. And they also often showed overconfidence, so presenting very strong conclusions without enough evidence to really back up those claims. So those are a couple of the concerns that were outlined by the domain experts and could be tackled in future work. Now we'll go over the downstream harms that were identified by the domain experts, kind of based on those concerns. So first of all, as mentioned before, it could lead to direct misinformation when these LLMs are queried and they provide information that's contradictory or simply not explored by past work. This can have like direct harm to the consumers. And also, it's unclear who should be held accountable and to what extent in these cases. So these are a couple of downstream harms that are serious and could be widespread and certainly need to be tackled before these LLMs are actually deployed in real use cases. So the final question that the interviewers asked the domain experts was, what would make experts feel more comfortable in using LLMs? Right. So what can we do in order to sort of bridge that gap that was outlined before? One big one is just having references. So forcing the large language model to have references kind of makes sure that it's actually using past work to justify its claims. In addition, making sure that there are easy ways to verify the outputs of large language models. And once again, they still expressed pretty strong preference for keeping humans in the loop. I think this is sort of the consensus for many sensitive use cases of machine learning models, whether it's medicine or finance or so on. While these tools are certainly very useful, there's still just not enough certainty that we can let the models run on their own. Oh, so now I'll go into the discussion section of the paper where the authors sort of present a summary of what they learned and some propositions for how to move forward. So the big question that the authors sort of target is, what are the perceived potential uses and harms of using LLMs for aiding the production of medical systematic reviews? So these are kind of things that we saw before in the results section in terms of both uses and harms. In summary, it seems like LLMs are most useful as writing tools. So, both as first drafts and also just for sort of more superficial tasks like spell checking, grammar checking, and so on. And they're also useful for summarizing inputs. So this is both for single document and multi-document summarization. They're pretty effective. But of course, we still need to do some verification. However, despite these uses, there's still some very strong concerns about the harms that using these models could have downstream, especially when it reaches like direct consumer interactions. And on this note, the authors propose a couple of ways of improving the current state of the art in this field. One is just making sure that when these large language models for reviews are deployed in the real world, making it clear to the user that the outputs of the model are intended as drafts and not as final reviews. So making it clear that there's a need for further verification by humans, or maybe even like a team of humans that can actually verify the output of the model. And also there could be some architectural change to large language models that are used in such cases, sort of augmenting them with some kind of knowledge retrieval framework where they can query documents on the fly. And this would make sure that they don't hallucinate as much because they have the ability to actually reread relevant documents when prompted. Now, the authors do acknowledge that there are several limitations with their work. First of all, they use a relatively small sample of domain experts, right? So only 16 experts, which they argue is intentional in their case because they're looking for, a strong, like a deep qualitative analysis rather than just a wide sample of experts. And I think that's fair. In addition, they have a pretty limited number of output samples. So there might be a need to do a more wide survey of the outputs, maybe across different models as well, to really see like the strengths and weaknesses of large language models as a whole or as a group. In addition, they, as mentioned before, they keep the prompting of the models very simple. So they don't really experiment with different prompting setups or different like system prompts. This is certainly an area for future work where maybe a prompt that stresses the importance of precision and adequate evidence would kind of encourage models to be more careful with the conclusions that they draw. I think that's a promising direction that could be explored. So that summarizes the work done by this team, appraising the potential uses and harms of large language models for medical systematic reviews. I'm really excited about how language models can be used to sort of automate the more tedious and, I guess in a sense, uninteresting tasks and aid medical professionals to quickly review a large corpus of medical text and be able to move on to actual clinical practices based on those conclusions. So this is an exciting work, and thank you for listening.